Hello everyone, Screenplay Archaeology host KiramidHead here. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to get some intro stuff out of the way. First things first, we are now part of the Fandom Limb Media podcast network, so I'm going to link their site down below. And that's why you would have just heard a promo for another podcast, because they're another one of the shows on the network. And as per usual, if you like the show and you'd like to know more, you can check out our social media pages on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, and even Instagram now. The show also has a Patreon if you're willing to gift money, but you don't really need to if you don't want to. And we also have a Discord server, which you can join if you want to chat with, the group members there. So that link is going to be down below as well. So yeah, sit back, guys, and enjoy the show. All right, everyone, hello and welcome to a new episode of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host, KiramidHead.
And I'm back from a long self-imposed hiatus. It's me, Chloe.
Yes, although I also wasn't exactly offering you episodes, so that's an aspect of it too.
Well, I mean, we were going to do the prisoner episode, but I think...
that was me too.
Yeah, hey, last year, no bueno, but yeah, we'll see.
Hey, if anyone wants to know, I basically stopped reading the first script because, there's a book about this thing that might have some context in it. And I waited a week. I put off finishing it. And then I get the book and it tells me like two things I didn't know. I'm like, that was not worth the wait.
Yeah,
that was kind of
fun,
a shit. Man. That was kind of a shit show. But I think I still have my partial notes still saved, so we can go back to that eventually.
Oh, we'll have to do that. I'll have to reread those scripts because man, it's been a while.
Yeah, same. I've only read them all the way through once each, and I think you would have wanted to comment on the People's script as well, just some offhand stuff.
I mean, there's not really much for me to add on to it. I think if we ever find the other drafts for it, more can be said. But as it stands, it would mostly just be the 2002 draft and then Patrick McGoon's earlier script.
Yeah, from the 90s. But that's enough shop talk for now. The subject of tonight's episode is Crusade, the infamous unmade historical epic about the Crusades that would have been directed by Paul Verhoeven, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger as kind of their follow-up to Total Recall, which it's interesting to think they only did the one movie together.
Yeah, I always forget that it's just that one movie, but I think it kind of encapsulates the best of both their careers.
Yes. And so the basic plot, before we get into contextual stuff, which there isn't going to be a whole lot of that, but it's basically the plot is that it's about a thief named Hagen who is around at the time when the Crusades are starting up, and he fakes a miracle, being involved in a miracle, so that he can get out of being hanged, and he joins the Crusades and goes on this big, bloody, often horrific adventure in the First Crusade. I think that's a good little lead in there.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if this were made today, considering our current political climate, because I think it actually has. I mean, just spoiler ahead. This does involve the joining of forces between Hagen, Ari, who's Jewish, and then Layla, who is Muslim. So it shows a nice camaraderie of peace between the major Abrahamic religions by the end, or at least between its people.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where I don't even know if they could make it now. Not like this. It's very much the kind of thing that would have been of its time, because you had stuff like it's not the same as Prince of Thieves, but it was the kind of movie they were making in like the wake of that being really successful.
Mm-hmm. And I think the obvious comparison that would be made would be to Kingdom of Heaven. This is much different from Kingdom of Heaven, but it would
Yes.
have pissed off. It would have pissed off people regardless.
I mean, Kingdom of Heaven's great, but it's a very different approach. Like, it's a different time period, too.
Yeah, that too. Um, but just getting back to what I was saying earlier, I think it would definitely ruffle all the right feathers when it comes to people who say they want more religious movies, but then when they want, they just it sort of reminds me of what Billy Friedkin said about Billy Graham and The Exorcist. It's like all he wants is a movie where everyone looks goo-goo-eyed at Jesus. So, but this one actually has some interesting things to say, I think.
Yeah, this one does have, it has a perspective to it. And so basically, the background for this one is that Paul Verhoeven had, come to Hollywood, been very successful, specifically with RoboCop, and then Total Recall, which was his collaboration with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they were putting together another project to do together, which ended up being this Crusade project. And of course, in the meantime, Arnold had gotten even bigger than he already was by doing Terminator 2, which kind of plays into the downfall of this a little bit. We'll talk about it later.
Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger proves to be a double-edged sword for Carolco as a company, and I say that with all due respect to Arnold. But this is also during the peak of Carolco as a company, and it ends up being their own success ends up being their own undoing.
Yeah. And so Verhoeven initially hires Waylon Green, who's a screenwriter who did, among other things, he did The Wild Bunch and Sorcerer, which are kind of big movies of their eras that people know of. Even though The Sorcerer is a notorious flop, it's a film that's kind of grown in reputation over time. Also, funnily enough, he worked on RoboCop 2.
It's easy to understate his impact in screenwriting. Looking through his IMDb profile, not only are there numerous films that he's credited on to one degree or another, there's going to be at least a couple dozen that he's a script doctor on.
Yeah, true. He has a credit on Arnold's later film Eraser.
Mm-hmm.
And now, granted, I do think he's a very good writer, and he does have his misses. I've read his adaptation of Red Dragon, which I thought was kind of a mess. Which I think that was the script that Dino De Laurentiis offered to David Lynch, and then I always find this story hilarious. David Lynch turned it down because he found it too dark and perverse, and then turned around and made Blue Velvet.
Mm-hmm. Different sensibilities.
Yeah, but then again, you read that script and you can kind of see why, because there's just like some needlessly nasty shit in that, even compared to the book.
Mm-hmm.
But so he gets them together. Waylon Green writes a draft of the script, but apparently Verhoeven puts the script aside because he's not satisfied with it, and he brings on Gary Goldman, who did the final pass on Total Recall, and they also worked on the Total Recall sequel together for a bit. And
Goldman was a script doctor on Basic Instinct.
Oh, that makes sense. And Goldman is like, Goldman actually says in this interview in Tales from Development Hell, he says like, I don't know why Paul wanted rewrites. The script was already good.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, he had to, like, basically throughout the writing process, he says like Verhoeven basically learned to appreciate that initial script more. So the version we're reading is actually closer to that. It doesn't have most of the bigger changes.
Yeah, and we should say that we only have a Gary Goldman draft from January of '93. We're still, the other ones are kind of what we call the unicorns in script collecting.
Yes, the terminology we all got from Captain Chaos.
Mm-hmm.
But the only draft we have is a Gary Goldman revision. I would like to read the Waylon Green version eventually, but I do get the sense from reading because apparently David Hughes in his book here, it seems like he has read that version. It sounds like most of the differences are kind of just cosmetic. Like certain things get shifted around, certain character relationships get changed, certain characters get apparently he doesn't combine characters. Like there's one example of like two characters who If like one character got split into two in Goldman's version, and like some of the action scenes got rewritten, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like the basic story and structure was there from the beginning.
And there is concept art, if I'm not mistaken. They got decently involved into deep into pre-production before the plug was pulled, didn't they?
I'm assuming they did because they actually were. I believe they were doing location scouting in Spain when the plug got pulled. So they were pretty far. The only piece of art I've ever seen is that promotional poster,
Okay.
which I'm assuming was like a Cannes Marketplace thing.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean, it's a great piece of art. But so diving into the script, which likely said is dated from January 1993. It opens in France in the year 1095, where a thief named Hagen approaches a hilltop abbey at night as a procession bearing a golden cross takes place inside the sanctuary. And back outside, Hagen finds a gap in the abbey walls where the slaughterhouse dumps the viscera. And he talks to his horse, which this reminds me of the Scorpion King, the way he talks to his camel.
Uh,
But he promises, he'll bring it carrots if it behaves. And so he swings a hook up on a rope like friggin' Batman, and he snags it onto the opening and climbs up into the slaughterhouse. And so as Hagen sneaks through the abbey to the vault, we get the first sort of Verhoeven commentary here with the abbot playing sexual games with two young acolytes.
do you want to read out the scene?
Do you really want to? What page are we on?
He has the abbot likes his boy sluts.
Yes. And they're basically like, they're putting on makeup, wearing dresses.
Yeah, femboy before femboys. We see them kind of being catty towards each other, like non-verbally, but you can tell there's like some rivalry between the dark-haired acolyte and the blonde acolyte.
They're competing for attention. They're very very Bryan Singer of him.
But I gotta tell you, there, we both grew up Catholic. There's, a serious problem in the Catholic Church with rap culture.
Yeah.
I was doing yeah.
But,
no, I remember once the Catholic Church did oust a priest for rapping instead of, well, the other word, and so the joke was at the time like, oh, they finally got confused and thought like, oh, we got to act on this whole rapping business.
How do you do?
We've been letting our priests, we've been letting our priests get along with rapping far too long. It all started when they listened to the Sugar Hill Gang.
Oh. But so he's like painting them with makeup and goes, no, you ladies, you need your jewels. And so he sends his secretary with the name Montfleury, part of my French accent, to fetch some from the vault. And so Hagen uses a pry bar to break into the treasure room, starts stuffing the sack he brought with riches. So he gets caught by Montfleury and the guard, who is escorting him to the vault, the latter of whom tries to trap Hagen inside with the broken door, only to get said door slammed into his face when the muscular thief throws it open. So he literally beats a guy up with a door in like the first 10 minutes of the movie.
I love this opening sequence.
Yeah.
It's very well paced in the atmosphere of the church or the abbey.
So Hagen flees across the courtyard, making his way to the escape hole, but doubles back to get carrots for his horse and from the storeroom. And so that's when the guards catch up, firing arrows at him as he slides down the rope and rides off on his horse. So a bit of Errol Flynn theatrics for Arnold here. And so the guards continue to pursue him into the nearby forest with dogs, where the horse throws Hagen and he gets overcome by his pursuers, despite his best efforts to fight back. And so he gets tied up and brought back to the abbey, where he is forced to kneel before the abbot, who pervs on his muscles a bit, which is not the first time a priest has perved on Arnold. See Conan the Barbarian for example.
Yep, I know. That's what I was thinking of. By the way, people, this is not the only bit of homoeroticism the script engages in.
Oh, it is all over.
And I appreciate it. It's actually, like I said, this is quite bold for its time.
It's he looks at Hagen's face, seems to recognize him, and tells Montfleury to summon Count Emic Bascarat, a name that brings a look of rage to Hagen's face. And good luck to you on how you pronounce either of those. We're going to pronounce it. We're both going to pronounce them differently.
I've been reading it as Emich, but I could look up a pronunciation tool here.
Well, one of the names looks German and the other name looks French, so I don't know what we're doing.
People often say image, but the CH is pronounced like a K.
I got it
Emic?
right.
Emic. Okay, then we will
What?
say Emic.
It's like Roland Emmerich without the middle syllable. Someone who you would not want directing a movie like this.
But it does feel like it was written on top of a pile of cocaine.
Yeah, true. It's more interesting than Godzilla or anything he's made in the last 20 years. But and so we then go to a farmyard in a valley where wine is being made, and we get introduced to Emic in a full-on rape scene. He is stained with wine as he chases down a teenage girl, throwing her into a wine vat and holding her under the liquid before taking her against the side of the vat and declaring the wine well seasoned, which is just ugh.
I assume this is Gerard Depardieu's Wet Dream.
Oh God, I was not expecting us to go there.
Hey, ever since Halloween 6, I gotta come up with at least one edgy joke per episode.
Yeah, true. But so Hagen obviously would be Schwarzenegger. Two names attached to Emic I've seen were Gary Sinise and Christopher McDonald, both of which are very interesting. I'm kind of picturing more McDonald when I'm reading this.
Yeah, I'm envisioning somebody who is more like openly sleazy, I guess. I don't know. I just don't see it in Sinise.
And I mean, I've seen him play villains, but they're not like this.
And I'm also just trying to think aesthetically, trying to fit him into late 11th century.
And it's also this is like that Next Generation episode. This is closer to that for Christopher McDonald, so that's an interesting career position. This is Thelma and Louise era Christopher McDonald. He doesn't step on a pizza in this.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've made at least two Ridley Scott references here already.
We're gonna make more.
Okay.
I mean, it's inevitable at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And so his cousin Valdemar, who's a character who's in this, he doesn't do a lot, but he's in enough scenes that his name was worth writing down. He approaches on horseback, bringing word from the abbot of Hagen's capture, and says the abbot requests his presence. And this is where we learn that Hagen is one of Emic's serfs, and he seems rather pleased at the thought of him getting hanged at the abbey. And so Emic comes before the abbot, and we learn that Hagen abandoned his service to become a thief. And we also learn from the abbot, who is Emic's father's confessor, that Hagen is Emic's bastard half-brother and that a document exists deeding him part of Emic's estate. And the abbot offers to keep quiet and hang Hagen in exchange for a quarter of his holdings, which the man reluctantly agrees to. And this is an element which, it comes up here and there, but it's kind of weird how it just kind of fades into the background every now and then, this whole familial relationship. And that's probably... Yeah, that's probably because it was part of the rewrite.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do like the development of making Emic more of just an outright asshole to everyone, but having personal motivation be an asshole towards Hagen. But yeah, it would definitely need to be a through line into the third act, and rereading the climax just like a couple hours ago, I could have forgotten that they were related.
Yes, and apparently the previous relationship between them in the initial draft is that he was a thief that, if I'm reading the wording in the book correct, he was a thief that Emic hired to rob the abbey.
I do prefer the half brother idea more.
Both of them are kind of interesting, but you can kind of see the seams here a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But so Hagen is put on trial, where we learned that he learned thievery working as Emic's pikeman, but he is declared guilty. But the sentence of death is passed down not by the abbot, but the bailiff, in this weird show of like performative morality on his part.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting commentary on hypocrisy in the power system.
Yeah, and doing a show trial.
Yeah. And Emic is chained in a cell as construction begins on the gallows, and soon after, a Vatican emissary named Prince Orsini arrives at the abbey, informing the abbot that Pope Urban II will be visiting and will require a platform to make an address, which means that the gallows will need to be torn down, and Hagen spared till after the Pope's visit. That's a fun little coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hagen notices the gallows being dismantled while doing chin-ups on his cell door, so Arnold gets to show off a little bit. And from there we go straight to the Pope arriving, which draws an awed crowd of peasants, while Emick takes note of Count Godfrey of Beyond, who accompanies the holy man. And these two guys are historical figures from the First Crusade, and they're portrayed fairly historically accurately, actually. From what
Yeah,
I can tell.
I was kind of I was kind of surprised. I mean, not I shouldn't really be, but this is definitely speculative fiction.
Yes, there are some places where it departs from the actual history. Like there's one big one involving another character that I'll talk about later, but we will but for the most part, it seems to at least be drawing from actual historical accounts while adding in its fictional elements. Unlike a certain other director we know about.
Yep. No, who could that be, Bruce?
Just shut the fuck up. And okay, and so as the Pope, after the Pope passes, we get a man named Arin Ben Zvi, who was called Ari, addresses the crowd, claiming to be selling water from the River Jordan, which can cure any illness. And he appears to cure an abscess on a man's face, but the bailiff grabs onto his arm, finding the fake abscess up his sleeve, before tying Ari to the wheel of a cart and letting the crowd beat him. Like, you got found out immediately. And so he gets chained up in the same cell as Hagen, where he tells the thief that selling holy artifacts is a lucrative business, but they need a well-constructed story to go along with them, so you really need to know your shit. And he just got careless and arrogant with this one, thinking he could sell water. That's a great little character.
Yep, and it sets up how they're going to proceed.
Yes, and this would have been John Turturro playing this role, which is just ideal casting.
Oh yeah, no, I like John Turturro as a character, as an actor. Him playing someone who is definitely God, I don't want to fall into God damn it, I don't want to mention anti-Semitic tropes, but he's definitely playing somewhat similar to his character in To Live and Die in L.A., which is a bullshitter. But unlike that guy, this one actually does have a heart of gold.
Yeah. He's a positive character development as the script goes along.
Definitely, and would have been some interesting queer representation for the time.
Oh, we'll get there.
Oh yeah.
And so that night in the abbot's apartment, Pope Urban, who would have been Charlton Heston in a cameo, overlooks a silver map of the world, which is Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean, and he points to the jewel marking Jerusalem, saying it's surrounded by the Muslim world, and remarking on how that religion has flourished because of its tenet that death in battle assures one's place in heaven. And he says that God will sanction the war to free Jerusalem, and his legate, Adhemar of Le Puy, who was also a real person, and would have been Robert Duvall, I believe. He hopes that God will provide them a sign. And so the next day, Pope Urban addresses the crowd outside the abbey, declaring this war to recapture Jerusalem, saying anyone who fights or supports the effort will be forgiven their sins, and calls on the people to take up the cross. And this is a real thing he did at an abbey. Like this whole, I don't know if like the exact contents of the speech are known, but this is how the Crusade started. And so Godfrey will lead the army, and Emick joins, seeing the ample opportunities this war will provide, and Valdemar goes along with him because he's a follower. And so, meanwhile, Ari and Hagen, along with a madman from across the hall in the dungeon, have been brought to the roof to listen to the Pope's speech, with Hagen getting an idea when he says that miracles will occur to prove that this war is indeed God's will. And so that night in the cell, Hagen has Ari reach a lantern through the bars and hand it to him. And he then uses it to heat up the ring he's chained to and burn a cross into his back, and then burn both palms, before asking Ari to describe the church where the fragment of the true cross is kept in Jerusalem. And so the next day, the locals are already discussing rumors of miracles. That shit moved fast.
Yeah, this is, I don't know, faster than word gets out on Right to Real, at least.
Yeah. And including a rain of frogs and a goose saying the Mass in Latin. I kind of want to see that. A goose speaking in Latin.
Oh, by the way, who do you think would have done the score for this? I mean, out of the two composers I can think of that were Verhoeven regulars at the time, you have Jerry Goldsmith and then Basil Poledouris.
Both would have been amazing. I mean, Goldsmith is a guy who could get brought on to do a score in like 3 months to replace another one and still knock it out of the park. Yeah, so the jailers go to wake the prisoners and are overcome with awe when they see the cross burned into Hagen's back. And Hagen is soon brought before the Pope in the Great Hall, where he claims it doesn't hurt, showing no pain when the abbot rubs salt into his wound, and that it came from a dream. So this is yet again, trading on Arnold being the strongest man in the world, that burn wounds don't even cause him pain.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of funny. But in the dream, he was a knight serving the cause in Jerusalem, and describes the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in detail, saying it was on fire, and a monk named Theodosius led him through the flame to the silver cross that the fragment is kept in. He grabbed it from the flames, burning his palms, and carried it on his back, making that burn, but he claims they felt cold, and he led the cross to safety. And Adhemar believes in the miracle immediately, but the abbot is skeptical, pointing out Hagen's attempted robbery, and Hagen says he has repented of his sins and wishes to join the crusade as a knight, and Pope Urban says he'll need time to think and pray on the matter. And what that means is that he discusses it privately with the abbot and the others, and means that the Pope isn't actually falling for his bullshit, which I thought that was an interesting plot point. But because he recognizes how useful this can be, noting that, these stories of the miracle are already starting to spread. So he's basically being this very canny sort of political figure, taking advantage of events.
Definitely. This is smartly written, in my opinion.
Yep, and because he's also not a complete idiot, he goes, okay, you're going to have to serve someone less naive than Godfrey, and has him placed in Emmek's service. And Hagen is then brought to the church to be made a knight, a ceremony that involves Emmek hitting him in the face with a gauntlet filled with pebbles and swearing service to his former lord. And I have never heard of that knighting ceremony, but I'm sure it exists, and I'm sure Emmek picked that one specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Just to mess with him. And Godfrey...
Oh, there's...
Yeah.
I was going to say before that, there's a funny exchange between peasants on page 28. Two peasants and a pet peasant. Do you want to read it out?
Page 28?
Yeah.
Let me get there. Okay. Through shafts of sunlight, dust rises from a milling crowd seeking the pledge for the crusade. Peasants, mainly, who will make up the rank and file of the army.
Along the Rhine, there have been holy signs, a rain of frogs.
In Thiel, it said a goose spoke the Latin mass.
And now my cow farted the liturgy.
Okay, that is...
Mm-hmm. Because there's not really a lot of random dialogue, but this is a prime example of the script just doing random dialogue, but I found it really funny.
Yeah. And so Godfrey offers to provide Hagen with horse and armor, but he says that he rode his own horse in the dream and gets it back from the bailiff.
Mm-hmm.
This horse is he has a weirdly personal bond with his horse.
Yep.
You half expect it to start talking.
It'd be funny to make this with Mr. Ed.
Yeah, or without the talk, just get the horse from Neverending Story.
Mm-hmm.
So Hagen also says that Ari was his squire in the dream and has him freed. And Ari is so happy that he tries to kiss Hagen on the lips. And I have a theory. It's because he's a criminal, and as he says in Transformers, criminals are hot.
Mm-hmm.
And he also has the madman freed for good measure, purely because he can. And he then starts...
By the way, folks, if you're Madman is the only name this guy is given.
Yeah, he's just Madman, and he's actually a recurring character. He keeps showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hagen starts to gain an entourage when Vault, a member of the Abbey Guard, and a few peasants offer to follow him despite his objections. And the madman gets a following of his own, as flagellants follow after him as he dances and chants nonsense. And at the
this would be if your trailer park uncle became part of the Crusade.
And so at the head of the army, the nobles, including Emmek, swear allegiance to Godfrey, who in turn declares that anyone who loots the lands they pass through will answer to him. And Emmek tells his own men, including Hagen, that any deserters will be dragged to the Holy Land with their bowels tied to his pommel.
Mm-hmm.
Nice image there. And the army then begins to move out, made up of hundreds of knights, accompanied by legions of monks led by Adhemar, as well as harlots who travel in ox carts. So many people pass by, they kick up enough dust to obscure the scene, setting up for a dissolve. And later, the army comes to a crossroads where another army joins them, making it even bigger. And Hagen tells Ari that he's planning to desert and flee to the land of the Slavs. But Ari, noting there's nothing worth stealing there, aside from, I think he says cowplops or something like that, convinces him to not let his hatred of Emick deter him from the riches they'll find, noting how much he got just for selling Hagen's old clothes along with some others that he stole and just said were his.
I was going to say, you could actually take this same premise and give it to Mel Brooks.
Yeah, you could, and make it
And
more
you
of a comedy.
Yeah, you would get a different movie, but like you would get the same. It's reminding me a lot of Blazing Saddles in its setup.
Yeah, Mel Brooks would play the Pope. I mean, right?
Yeah. But yeah, no. I was gonna say it's actually it's pretty good at playing it both straight and comedic at the same time.
Yeah, it's a good tonal balance.
Which is because again, this would have been the biggest budget at the time, or one of. This is meant to be a big tentpole release for, obviously Schwarzenegger, Verhoeven, and Carolco. So the audience that it has to play to strike a balance to make people say, okay, I'll accept this. I'll accept this blasphemy. It's quite interesting.
Yes, and I don't know if it would have hit quite the budget of True Lies, because True Lies infamously was the first $100 million movie ever. Mm-hmm. But it would have gotten close. I think they were looking at something like 90 million or something like that for it. So
yeah, and then you have to have contingency money as well.
Yes, of course, and not to mention the marketing budget.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometime later, the army has made camp by the road, where Emick watches as Valdemar and one of his men, Ivo, make use of some prostitutes who only show their lower halves outside of tents. So it's literally a tent with legs and a pussy sticking out of it.
It's literally the joke of like a woman showing whenever a comedic sketch is like doing something from like the 1800s, you have a bit where like a woman raises her ankle and you have like the men fawning over it. It's kind of like that joke, honestly.
It's like it's almost a glory hole.
Mm-hmm. Wait, who said anything about a man? See, now that's the beauty of the glory hole. It could be anybody.
Yeah, we know that. I mean, you're from Minnesota. You know all about that.
I was just citing whitest kids,
Of course.
Okay. For the record, people, I have never encountered a glory hole.
Just that one in the Minnesota airport.
Yep.
But no dick, just ball. Okay, we're done. Because it's about to get heavy again, and that's when a Jewish wedding party rides by. Emick and his men stop them and extort gold out of them, and then attempts to pull the bride from the cart and rape her. Hagen intervenes, refusing Emick's order to help, and challenges him to a fight, asking if he has to wear a dress to make Emick show courage. Boom! Great burn.
Yeah.
A brutal duel ensues, with Emick breaking an axe Ari throws to Hagen and Valdemar tripping Hagen. And Hagen eventually uses the broken axe handle like a bat and smashes in Emick's helmet, crumpling it onto his face and making him bleed profusely. And Hagen refrains from killing him and leaves, and the Count needs a smith to snip the rivets and remove the helmet, revealing half of his face completely ruined and scarred, including having lost a few teeth. And apparently this sequence plays a little differently in the original draft. In the original draft, Hagen is too late to keep the party from being massacred. And not only does Emick get disfigured, he gets dressed down and demoted by one of the other Crusade leaders.
Interesting. I'm trying to think. I'd like to read that version of the scene.
Yeah, just to see how it plays.
Mm-hmm.
And Valdemar offers to kill Hagen in retaliation, but Emick says that death isn't enough. And the army soon arrives at the Italian port of Bari, where they begin loading onto ships to travel to the Holy Land. And a hooded Emick, who is Dr. Doom now apparently, meets with a Genoese merchant named Vermi. Subtle name choice there, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Paying him 500 denarii to make sure Hagen is placed aboard a specific ship. And Vermi asks if Hagen is the only one responsible for Emick's now hideously stitched face, but backs down when the Count gets threatening. And sometime after, Hagen awakes aboard a ship with Ari, Vault, and a whole bunch of monks, basically his entourage, which is at sea and far from the rest of the fleet. And he asks Ari about this when a Muslim corsair ship appears from behind a nearby island. They notice that the crew is dropping sail, and Ari realizes that the crew has sold them out to Muslim slavers, and their only chance is to take the ship and run. And so they fight the sailors, Hagen even dashing one's brains out, but the Corsairs catch up with them, and despite much fighting, which I'm glossing over the fighting, but it's all really good action writing.
Yeah, after a while, I mean, we'd be here all day if we tried to describe how well written the action is.
Yeah.
It really is something you have to read for yourself. One has to read for themselves, and it's a reason why when I'm writing action, I tend to suck after a while, and I try to breeze by a fight with like a sentence, because it would all be something that I would want a crew to figure it out, but it's something that I know I have to figure out too at some point.
I feel like the way I write my notes here on these action scenes is kind of how I would write the action scenes, is that I mentioned that it's an action scene and I mentioned a few specific things, but I don't get like disgustingly detailed with it.
Yeah, I don't until I would be working with a director, presumably, or stuff like that.
Yeah. And so they get captured. Ari weasels his way out of it by pretending to be a Muslim, describing Mecca and even whipping out his circumcised penis as proof, and he is let go. Luckily, there was not an 8-year-old in the room.
Mm-hmm.
I had to get that one in there.
Yep.
And the slave ship soon arrives in Jaffa, with Hagen and the rest move to some slave pens and then into cells surrounding a courtyard. A surgeon and his assistant prepare tools by a large table, and Vault is selected, taken from the cell, strapped to the table, castrated, the wound cauterized, oiled, and packed with dung, so they've been sold to be made into eunuchs. And that's why I mentioned Vault, because this is his entire role in this thing. And
yes,
it's funny. I find it kind of funny because when he's like asking to follow Hagen on the Crusade, Hagen tries to tell them to stay here, and he goes like, "But we have nothing here." And I'm like, "Congratulations, guys! You went on Crusade, and you ended up with even less."
Yep.
And also, there's this weird kind of darkly funny bit where they just plop the dick and balls into like a bowl, and like a dog walks by and starts sniffing it. I'm like, okay, Paul, tone it down.
Yeah. This script is really concerned with the sausage.
Yes. I feel like this scene is just Paul Verhoeven going like, okay, how much can I get away with? Because this scene would have been an MPAA fight, especially in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, considering that, I mean, we were talking about Scream yesterday, but like, like the first Scream had received like NC-17, and they had to cut down like just 20 seconds. Then like a decade later, you have Casino Royale having to make concessions for both for UK and American cuts, and this is times 100 in what's meant to be the disgust factor.
Yeah. And so Hagen is selected next, and also like, so Hagen is selected next, but is saved at the last possible minute when a group of Arabs arrive, led by Ari, saying that the Emir Ibn Khaldun of Jerusalem wishes to purchase him. And the lead slaver objects, saying that they have a deal with the Genoese to make this man a eunuch, and Ari haggles over the price a little before finalizing the deal. Like, there's this really funny moment where he's like goes to walk out of the room and then walks back in to keep dealing.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hagen gets saved and taken away, but the monks are all left behind and they're all freaking out. And I'm like, come on, guys, you weren't using that anyways.
Yep. I should also say, thank God Mel Gibson did not see this script.
Oh.
Yeah. This script is a lot more positive than a Mel Gibson religious thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, true.
I mean, it does not stray away from like darkness and brutality, but it's actually made by people with sensibility.
It's not Jesus getting the shit beat out of him for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it's not cynical, even though there is some cynical commentary in the script. Like I said again, this is something where I could have easily have like seen this being a disaster in the wrong hands.
Yes, totally.
But I think it, as outrageous as it gets, I think it's as respectful as it could be.
Yeah, I think it's a very it's a very thoughtful script, even with the outrageous elements.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is Paul Verhoeven at his best.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You mentioned Mel Gibson. Imagine if Garth Ennis read this script.
Mm.
That man has explored every
Um,
form of castration in the book in his work.
yeah. Getting back to Verhoeven, have you seen L?
I haven't seen any of his stuff post like 2000.
Oh, it's really good. I got to see it in the theater when it came out, and nobody else really did. I was like one of the only people there, and I had a college classmate working at the theater, and like he said, like other people didn't seem to understand it, I just said like going into it, like, look, I know it's gonna be touching on taboo subjects, but it's Paul Verhoeven, so I expect something interesting out of it. And I need to
Yeah.
see it again, though. It's been a while.
And his last film was the Nunsploitation movie, right?
I don't know. I didn't know he had
Uh,
done another one. I'm not
I
surprised.
think it's called Benedetta.
Okay,
It's just weird that
I'll
Paul
have to check that
Verhoeven
out.
did Hollywood and then he did France.
Yes.
I don't know why that's so funny to me. It just is.
I assume French producers give him a little more leeway now than Hollywood producers would.
Well, of course they would. They have to
Yep.
put up with Gaspar Noé.
Yep.
Okay, so Hagen is placed in a cart driven by Ambu, a black slave that Ari explains is the chief of Ibn Khaldun's guard, and that he will train Hagen to become one of them. And he set this up as his uncle Jakob is counselor to the emir. And Hagen isn't thrilled about this, but Ari says that the Crusaders are now besieging Antioch. Damn, they got there fast. That Hagen will have an opportunity to escape when they march on Jerusalem and should bide his time. So yeah, the Crusade kind of becomes a background element for the middle of this script. It's an interesting choice. But it's done for a purpose.
Yes.
They soon arrive in Jerusalem, and Hagen is surprised to see that Christians and Jews freely worship alongside Muslims because in his big speech, the Pope was like, oh, they're going to rape all our nuns, blah, 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 which was clearly hype.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and obviously we haven't heard the last of that kind of rhetoric in terms of generalizing entire groups of people, obviously.
Oh, no.
It's and this is obviously like still pre 9/11. Look, my take on this is that I'm going to be critical of a religion no matter what, but I understand people are people, and so as long as people are sensible and good towards others, then I don't really care. It's when you get fundamentalism or evangelicalism involved, and obviously infringing on the rights of others, then that's where I'll have my vocal opposition. That's where I'll put on my Reddit atheist fedora.
Yeah, it's better than a YouTube atheist.
I mean,
Yeah.
kind of this. They kind of run in the same circle.
Yeah.
Granted, YouTube. I was gonna say YouTube atheists, not to get into like a discussion of the last 10 years, but like they've gone down to being just as asshole-ish as the very people they used to criticize.
Mm-hmm. And that is historically accurate that they were all free to worship in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and look, I'm not a scholar on Islam. I have friends, but like the point is that's not. It's meant to be aracial in terms of who can worship.
Yes, that is true. They will take anybody. And they even pass the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and Hagen briefly locks eyes with Theodosius. So we're setting stuff up for later. And they arrive at Ibn Khaldun's palace, where Hagen is shown to his quarters, while Ari meets his uncle Jakob, explaining how he got a fair price. Very.
I was gonna say that was that name that you said earlier. That was also hinted in the first act as part of Hagen's bullshit.
Yes, Theodosius, because he got the gist of what the church was like from Ari, because Ari's been there and knows all about it.
Yeah, and then he did a form of like a cold reading to get onto the name.
Yeah, and so we are then introduced to Ibn Khaldun and his daughter Layla. I'm going to refrain from making a Derek and the Dominoes reference. As she
different spelling.
Yes, as she received. Well, it's a different spelling, but it's the same name. It comes from that old story. Yes.
I know. We both have read the Eric Clapton script.
That was pretty good for a music biopic,
especially on somebody as jerkish as Eric Clapton.
Oh, I know. I've read his autobiography.
My dad interviewed him.
Okay, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole.
We are not. No, but yes. on the point of saying that this is where the name comes from.
Yes, and so she receives a marriage proposal from Dukak, the ruler of Damascus, who is a real historical figure, but there's a difference between this and the previous draft that I'll get to later. But but which
and also we should point out that Layla was supposed to be played by Jennifer Connelly.
Yes, whom Verhoeven said he continuously tried to work with her, but it either didn't work out because of scheduling or she thought it wasn't her kind of movie, which makes me wonder which movies those were.
Showgirls was on that list.
I'm like, did you try to get her in Hollow Man, Paul?
Yeah. You know, it's weird that Hollow Man 2 is a better movie than Hollow Man.
I have not seen, I've only seen the first one. I can only imagine if Paul was like, Jennifer, I want you to play the neighbor who doesn't even have a name.
Who gets raped. Yeah, I know. That's like the one time I'm going to be critical of Paul Verhoeven and his violence, I guess. But no, in Hollow Man 2, there are some actual like clever sequences where you have the guy who is invisible in an elevator with a blind woman. It's not revealed that she's blind until she steps out of the elevator and pulls out her cane, like a retractable cane. But they're having like a normal conversation, and she goes, I really like working nights because nobody else is around here to bother me. And they're just having a normal conversation while he's there to infiltrate to kill the higher up. And then there's another sequence where the hero becomes invisible and kills one of the corporate guys. Corporate guy thinks that's the first invisible guy, but he gets led into a road and then he goes, there's this one thing I'm not so-and-so. And then the guy turns around realizing that it's another invisible man, and then he gets hit by a truck.
Oh, that's...
Yeah, so like, I'm describing you Hollow Man 2 because there are actual scenes of brilliance in that movie.
And all right, so she rejects the offer, dropping the jeweled painting of Dukak that was given to her as a gift. And the way he's described, he's like this big, obese, almost kind of Baron Harkonnen like figure in the painting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's made clear here that Ibn Khaldun has allowed her to choose her own husband, despite how much it exasperates him. And that's another change in the rewrite. In the original draft, the arranged marriage was already set, but it gets dissolved as the plot continues.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hagen is brought before Ibn Khaldun, and after being asked about the Crusader army, he says that while some wish to recapture the Christian shrines, he was just after gold. And Ibn Khaldun is like, I like you, you're honest, and orders Ambu to begin his training. And so Layla and Sheba, her personal slave, sneak out to watch the training as Sheba has told her of how tall he is. And they even watch as he strips down to bathe, and he notices their silhouettes in the tower window and immediately manages to lock gaze with Layla, and the attraction is instant and mutual. Literally love at first sight.
Yes, and also being done without dialogue, similar to the first Conan.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they have like 2 lines. He speaks 2 lines to her in that movie.
Yep. Here, there's obviously more dialogue, but the first their love at first sight scene is similar in that regard.
Yeah, and I think Verhoeven's a good enough director; he could have managed it.
Mm-hmm.
And we then go to the Crusader army, which has managed to conquer Antioch and has impaled Muslim soldiers outside the walls. However, there's very little food in the city, and the army is beginning to starve. And while Godfrey has left the city to find grain, Emmett concocts a plan and has the captured Muslim civilians killed and cooked up in a stew to feed the soldiers. His original plan was then for them to eat pieces of shit for breakfast, but they told him to fuck off.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently this may have happened. There's some sources do mention cannibalism after the siege of Antioch, but it's not clear. Not all of them do. So it could be propaganda, but you don't know.
Yeah.
But it's at least based on something. And Godfrey discovers this upon his return and tries to get Adhamar to denounce Emic and cast him out. And Emic argues that savagery is merely a part of war, and Adhamar lets him off, saying that they need him to continue to fight, and declares that God will forgive their sins if they capture Jerusalem. So this is a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
And also colonizer justification.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Which, in that land we haven't seen since, of course. That's,
Send your comments that way. A meeting is held in the governor's baths at Jerusalem, including Ibn Khaldun, Governor Iftikhar, a mullah named Jarvat, Dukak of Damascus, and a rabbi named Akiva, who is not a screenwriter, representing the Jews of the city.
Mm-hmm.
There's worries that they don't have enough men to protect Jerusalem, and Dukak refuses to let his men help unless he can secure Layla's hand, and Ibn Haldun wants to attempt a truce. Jarvat thinks this is foolish, but Akiva backs him up, saying the Jews will support the attempt. This is the thing I was talking about earlier, because apparently in the initial draft, Jarvat and Dukak are the same character.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just Jarvat. There's no split. I'm curious to see how that reads, because I'm not really, because Jarvat's the one who kind of does everything in this script. Dukak's just kind of there.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't even think he's in it after this scene, if I'm remembering right.
Mm-hmm.
But so that night, Hagen notices that the barred door to the slave quarters has been left open.
You also forgot the fact that there's a character named Baldwin.
Oh, there is?
Yeah, but joke averted.
Baldwin? Oh, well, I mean, Baldwin really doesn't do anything in this from what I remember.
Yeah.
He's just another crusader. So I stopped writing down names after a while because I figured they weren't going to be important.
Yeah, either they were meant to be this minor of a character, or it was going to be, fleshed out in a rewrite. Who knows?
True. And so to get back to what I was doing, that night Hagen notices the barred door to the slave quarters has been left open and grabs a makeshift rope he's constructed to climb the wall in an escape attempt. He stops to peek into the harem, though, before looking in the window of Layla's room. He then climbs down to her balcony, only to find her awake, and they look at each other for a moment before he backs away. And Hagen opts to return to his quarters, where he finds Sheba waiting for him. Layla has sent her there to learn of Hagen by sleeping with him, and he readily submits. He's like, your women are very different from ours. And the next day, Ibn Haldun prepares his entourage to leave for the peace mission. Ari meets with Hagen, saying that the emir suspects that Dukak will attempt to take Layla while he is away, and has ordered her taken under guard to her uncle's estate in Nablus. And Ari has suggested Hagen for the guard duty as a means of giving him a chance to escape, but asks him to wait until after Layla has been delivered safely. Ari, on the other hand, will be accompanying Ibn Haldun on his peace mission. And Hagen thinks the emir is foolish for this, but Ari feels that even if the worst happens, the two of them will make it out okay, and gives Hagen a kiss before they depart, and Hagen's just okay with it. I do like the friendship between these two. It's fun watching it grow as the script continues.
Definitely.
And so Layla and her escort set off, traveling through the mountains, and she and Hagen share more dramatic looks along the way. And Sheba assures her that he didn't surrender his heart, even though he surrendered his dick to her. So it's cool. They make camp in a mountain pass, and while Hagen is away from the camp on a hillside, Jarvat and his black-robed men attack, capturing Layla and killing everyone else there, including Sheba and Ambu. So bye, characters we set up. Hagen tries to come to Layla's rescue, but gets overwhelmed by Jarvat's men, who choke him with a garrote until their leader sees the cross on his back and has a donkey brought and slits its throat. And this is
now
the second most infamous scene in the script?
Yep. Whenever this script gets brought up in broader circles, this is going to be like one of the two scenes that gets talked about.
And so Hagen passes out and comes to the next day, having been stitched into the dead donkey with his head sticking out of its anus, having been left for the scavengers to feast on. And we just get this extended sequence of him like flexing his muscles and trying to like break out of this dead donkey while scavenging animals are like sniffing around, and he's making noises at them to make them go away and all that. And it goes on for a bit, like it goes on for most of a page.
I was gonna say it again, going back to Conan, reminding me of the Tree of Woe, but more disgusting.
Oh yeah, because it's describing just the muck and the decay, and you can almost smell.
And in terms of, I think one of the hardest things in screenwriting to present or to give to the reader is a sense of smell.
Yes.
Usually when I'm writing and I want the reader to think of a smell, I go into the color of something. I'll describe a sound that accompanies it. So, like, let's say you have flies flying around dung type deal.
Yeah.
You can just kind of create through those other senses. You can then infer a sense of smell, which is always hard to do in writing, but equally, if not more, harder to do in screenwriting.
Yeah, or you could do the Robert Rodriguez approach and just give people cards that are supposed to smell like things.
Mm-hmm.
God, that's a dated reference now.
Yeah, who gives a shit, Bruce?
Yeah, no one cares about fucking Spy Kids 4.
Mm-hmm.
No, but it takes some time, but he flexes his arms until the decaying muck from inside the donkey lubricates his arms enough to free them from their bonds, and then tears out of the corpse and unbinds his feet, leaving the remains for the scavengers. And he takes the black keffiyeh from one of Jarvat's dead men as a disguise, which for some reason isn't comically small on Arnold, and heads off in search of Layla.
Mm-hmm.
Jarvat has taken Layla to an abandoned mosque where he explains to her that she's being held hostage to force Ibn Khaldun to give up on the peace mission and prepare for war. He prepares a message to be sent by carrier pigeon, and when he tries to scent it with her perfume, Layla bites his hand. And Hagen arrives just as the message is sent, and Jarvat's men are called to prayer. He takes a nearby beehive on his spear and hurls it into the men, distracting them with attacking bees as he sneaks up to the mosque. The Bioshock approach.
Mm-hmm.
You can also do that in Metal Gear Solid 3. You can drop beehives on people.
Yeah.
You can do it to Ocelot during his boss fight. It's hilarious.
Definitely.
Yeah, and so Jarvat peeks out the window to see what the hell is going on, and Hagen grabs him by the beard and rips it off his face, fucking Peter the Great style. And taking his sword from him and freeing Layla, Jarvat regroups his men and sends them after Hagen and Layla. And
you should mention the one-liner that we get from the beard ripping.
Oh, what was the one-liner?
It looked better on you. And on is underlined, meaning, yeah.
It looked better on you.
Mm-hmm.
And so they escape. Jarvat regroups his men, sends them after them. Hagen kills 2 of them before stampeding the men's horses to cover their escape. Riding away on 2 of the horses, they pulled off to the side. They stop at a stream where Layla asks Hagen to take her to her father at Caesarea, as her uncle's estate is no longer safe. Hagen replies that he's free now and is loyal to himself, but she says he won't get far and promises his freedom if he helps her. And the messenger pigeon arrives at Ibn Khaldun's camp, and he reluctantly ends the peace mission right there. Elsewhere, Hagen and Layla are traveling through the mountains, and he admits he has no one at home and is proud of his serfdom. Like, he's proud of who he is. He doesn't want to be a noble or anything like that. And they soon arrive at an isolated farm with a helpful couple who nothing at all bad is going to happen to, offers them dinner, allows them to sleep in the barn for the night. And Hagen says they have no time, but Layla insists, and they end up fucking in the hayloft. And so much could have been avoided if they didn't do this.
Yep.
The next morning, Layla goes to get water from the well and finds that the old couple have been murdered by Valdemar and his men, who are raiding for supplies. No word on if they were making a ridiculously huge breakfast before they were killed.
Yes, I know what you're referencing.
Yes, I'm glad. I'm glad someone does.
Yep.
My 5th or 6th favorite movie of the year?
It's up there.
Valdemar is about to rape Layla on top of a manure pile. There's that Verhoeven touch again. When Hagen intervenes, spearing him through the face with a trident. There we go, a trident.
Yep.
He fights off the men, sends Layla off on a horse, but gets overwhelmed and captured when more men show up, led by Ivo. Also, isn't this just the unluckiest of coincidences they happen to run into these guys?
Yep.
And she continues through, Layla looks back briefly and continues through the mountain pass, not knowing that Jarvat and his men are waiting on the other side. And Hagen, tied to a yoke, is taken to the Crusader camp where Emic has grown in influence, rivaling even Godfrey in his number of followers. And the madman spots Hagen, so he's back, starts a frenzy while Hagen is taken to Emic's tent where an orgy involving underage girls is taking place.
And we get dialogue describing their pedophilia.
Yes. Emic, more like Epstein of Basquiat.
Yep.
And Emic is disgusted to see him and starts beating him with a mace, which Hagen catches on his yoke, braining him with the other end. So he's almost a comedy villain at this point.
Yes.
And Atamar, alerted by the madman's followers, arrives, and Emic tries to pass Hagen off as a traitor. Godfrey says Emic is already treating himself as king of Jerusalem, and they argue for a bit. And Hagen tells Atamar about Emic selling him as a slave, while Emic claims it's a lie. And Atamar goes, okay, settle it in single combat, but after they conquer Jerusalem. And Hagen tells Atamar that the Christians are free to worship in Jerusalem, that Ibn Khaldun is an honorable man who will seek peace. And Atamar seems open to this, but suddenly Jarvat and his men, alongside Ibn Khaldun, attack the camp, shooting Atamar with an arrow. And the Muslim army attacks in force, and Hagen is freed by Godfrey as they need every hand in the fight. And Hagen, starting with only a scythe, and slowly gathers the armor and weapons of a crusader from the dead before finally mounting a horse. A knight once more. That's a very cool sequence as written on the page.
Definitely.
And the crusaders are nearly defeated and begin to flee when smoke covers the battlefield, and the madman points out the giant shadow of a horse-mounted warrior on the smoke, fighting and killing Muslim soldiers, and this rallies the army, gets them to regroup, doubly so when the warrior emerges from the smoke, revealing Hagen. And that moment is apparently something that was added in the rewrite.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the cooler visuals, at least.
Yeah.
So Godfrey, Emic, and Hagen lead the counterattack against the Muslims, which is so fierce that Jarvat and his men desert the battlefield. And Hagen comes upon Ibn Khaldun, who tells him that Jarvat has kidnapped Layla again. And Khaldun has his banners thrown down in a gesture of surrender, and Godfrey orders he and his men be spared. But Emic ignores this and kills the emir, and the rest of the army is massacred where they stand. And even the peasants and women following the army taking part. Like, damn.
We should also mention there's the famous amount of horses that Verhoeven wanted, apparently, according to Vic Armstrong.
Oh yeah, how many was it?
Was it like initially like 300, or it was basically something, or it was like 600 horses, and then Vic was like, we can do like 300. That'll be much more sustainable. And then Verhoeven eventually agrees, and then gets a call the next day saying Verhoeven wants his original number of 800 horses.
Oh God, I could see that going. I could see that going very badly, Heaven's Gate style.
Yeah,
that's a lot of horses.
Yep.
And after the battle, Hagen is distraught, tearing the tunic with the Crusader cross from his armor. And that's when, coincidence of coincidence, his old horse finds him, and this restores his hope that he can find Layla. He rides into camp, and his entourage begins to form again, following him wherever he goes. I should know if you're the Messiah, Lord. I've followed a few. And so we get a monk named Brother Bernard who takes him to the dying Adhamar, who begs him to save the true cross and become king, as he is the only one among them who is blessed. Hagen admits to the deception with his burn, but Adhamar passes away as he speaks, dying with a look of peace on his face. Okay, so this is one of the big historical departures here. The biggest one that I found in my cursory research on Wikipedia is that Adhamar, in real life, he didn't make it past Antioch because he died of dysentery.
This is probably a better way to go.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised Verhoeven didn't want a dysentery scene.
Yeah.
And so the Crusader army soon arrives at Jerusalem with Godfrey, Emic, and Hagen riding at the front. Emic meets with Hagen, offering him a deal, support him in his efforts to become king of Jerusalem, and Hagen can have their father's lands in return. Hagen amicably refuses, which only incenses Emic more. And so, inside Jerusalem, Jarvat has Layla imprisoned inside her father's palace and now plans to trade her to Dukak in exchange for his military aid, placing guards around her to make sure she doesn't take her own life. Outside the walls, Hagen is helping construct siege towers when a monk approaches, preaching that the Crusaders must kill all who offend Christ, even the women and children, and he gets closer to Hagen, revealing himself to be Ari. So, great deception.
Yep.
And he tells him that Layla is in the city. He's going to be shipped off to Damascus at dawn. He also offers to show Hagen the way into the city, which they will take after dark. And so at dusk, the battle commences with the defenders hurling Greek fire at the siege towers, while bucket brigades try to keep the flames under control. I don't think you can put out Greek fire with water, but
Gotta try something.
Gotta try something. And so, yeah, Ari leads Hagen to some ruins near the walls and sneaks him into the city via an old cistern that once connected to the Temple of Solomon and a place where Ari used to play as a kid. That actually makes me think of George Romero's Resident Evil, weirdly, how Chris Redfield knows the secret passages in the mansion because he used to play in it as a kid.
Yeah.
And also, I believe this is based on the there is a real like tunnel that went into Jerusalem that would have connected to the Temple Mount. It was designed to bring water up to the temple, not divert the blood from the animal sacrifices, but it's the same basic idea.
Yeah.
And outside, Emick and his men force Muslim prisoners to launch rocks at the city with catapults, and when they run out of rocks, they behead the prisoners and use the heads as ammunition. Nice image.
Mm-hmm.
And this last move prompts Iftikhar to order Jarvat to send Layla to Damascus now instead of in the morning, and he agrees, promising to handle the delivery himself. I'm not entirely sure how they plan to get past the besieging army. They don't really explain that part.
Mm-hmm.
So Hagen and Ari exit the cistern near the Wailing Wall of the Old Temple, while the siege continues with Ivo firing giant burning arrows over the walls. One of these hits Ibn Khaldun's palace, where Jarvat has Layla tied to a horse, and sends men ahead of him to open the gate. And the full assault on the city begins, and Jarvat and his men are trapped in an alley with rubble in front of them, and Hagen and Ari behind. They both fight Jarvat's men, with Ari rescuing Layla, while Hagen fights Jarvat. A mangonel is fired, and the missile hits the nearby building, knocking both men over and making Hagen lose his sword for a moment. And Jarvat nearly kills Hagen, but Layla gets him with a cast-off scimitar just in time, brutally hacking at his corpse. So, nice, juicy death for one of the villains.
Mm-hmm.
And the Crusaders, led by Emick, break in through the temple gate and start rampaging through the city, including massacring the Jews of the city, egged on by the words of a hermit monk. And Ari suggests they seek shelter in the Holy Sepulchre, assuming the Crusaders will spare the Christians, but leaves to help his uncle when he sees Jakob with the Jews who are being attacked. And both Ari and Jakob are trapped inside a synagogue as the Crusaders set it alight, and that's a nice little dramatic tension moment where you're wondering what's going to happen, and they leave it there, and you kind of forget about it for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And Emick leads the massacre, but refrains from looting the Jewish quarter, as he says gaining the true cross will assure his place as king of Jerusalem. That's a whole thing they talk about in like their scenes with Godfrey, where it's like where like obtaining the true cross will like solidify their position within the Crusader kingdom. Like that's a thing they've discussed before. I just kind of glossed over it because it wasn't a huge deal yet.
Yeah.
So Hagen and Layla flee through the city and make it inside the Holy Sepulchre's courtyard. However, the church itself has caught on fire in the chaos, and Theodosius picks Hagen out to rescue the cross, saying that he has the strength and that God has sent him. And Hagen enters the burning church and carries out the silver cross, burning himself in the process, just like in the dream he concocted. That is a very interesting moment to kind of wrap the script up on. That his bullshit turns out to be real.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting coming from Verhoeven and the kind of jaundiced approach the script has towards Christianity throughout most of it. That ends on this sliver of, what's going on there? It leaves something for the audience to think about it.
Yeah.
Emick and his men burst into the courtyard just in time to see him emerge from the flames and hand the cross over to the monks, telling them to hide it. And every one of them but Emick falls to their knees in religious awe. The madman declares Hagen the king, and Emick runs him through and begins to duel with Hagen from horseback. They fight for a bit before Hagen cuts Emick in half, the spooked horse carrying his lower half out into the city. Excellent, excellent death.
Yeah, but see what I meant earlier by, like, at this point, you could have forgotten that they're brothers, and so like, just a little more through line of the fact that they are rival brothers.
Yeah, it comes up at the beginning. It comes up slightly later when Ari mentions, so the rumors are true, blah blah blah, and then I think it gets mentioned ish in one of his conversations with Layla, and then they mentioned it before the siege, and then it's kind of forgotten.
Yeah, but other than that, this is a really good climax.
Yeah. I mean, just him getting chopped in half like he's Gary Busey at the end of Predator 2 was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day,
I should also say, when reading the script again for this episode, this is just a point where I kept rereading this with awe. I was firmly hooked by this point.
Yeah, it's a great scene the way it's written. I can't really do justice to it in the format of this show, unfortunately.
Unless we just want to read it out, but
yeah,
we actually really want people to read this script, and it's easy to find. So this isn't one where you have to come and ask us or do a huge search. It's relatively easy to find.
Yeah, it's out there.
You know
people know it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next day, the hermit monk, now dressed as a bishop, leads the victorious crusaders in a procession through the still burning, body-littered streets of Jerusalem. And that's more commentary right there.
Mm-hmm.
Hagen and Layla have packed 2 horses for travel and plan to leave the city and run into the procession outside the ruins of the synagogue, surrounded by burning bodies. And Godfrey asks for Hagen to attend his coronation as king of Jerusalem and promises him a high place in his kingdom. And when Godfrey says they have restored God's kingdom, Hagen scoffs, telling him to inhale the smell of the bodies. And as Hagen and Layla continue on their way, they're met by a beggar, who turns out to be Ari, who found a way out of the synagogue for his uncle and a few others. Not really, he doesn't go into detail, but I guess he doesn't really need to. At this point, you can buy that he would have found a way out.
He's kind of like a Bugs Bunny in that regard.
Yeah, oh definitely.
I mean, he does the disguises.
Mm-hmm.
There's a queer factor to the character.
Mm-hmm.
Bugs Bunny.
And so, though the couple say they intend to leave and make a living farming, which is kind of similar to the ending of Kingdom of Heaven when you think about it.
Yep.
Yeah, they go back to his house in France at the end.
Yep.
And so
we end then with an end title.
Yeah, and so Ari says he's going to remain and continue his trade in the city. Yes. And Hagen and Layla, they exit the gates of the city. The sound in church bells is overcome by the sound of wind that says they ride into the mountains of Lebanon. And text appears on the screen, and I'm just going to jump to the end of the script and read it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you want to read it.
No, go ahead.
Even under torture, the monks of the Holy Sepulchre refused to reveal the hiding place of the true cross. It was never found. Which is dramatic license because they were tortured and they did reveal its location.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not, I mean, you're fictionalizing. It's acceptable.
Yeah.
And that's the ending. Overall, solid script.
Hasn't Gary Goldman said, obviously this between this and the Total Recall 2, it's gonna be Crusade that us, aspiring filmmakers and college students are asking him about all the time.
Yeah, I believe so.
Mm-hmm.
Total Recall 2.
We can see why this is not hype. This isn't where Superman Lives, where I think some people talk up those later drafts.
Oh yeah.
This is a legitimately ballsy script, and it would have definitely, like I said, ruffled more of the fanatical sides of say Zionists or of the Christian right or of Islam. But I think it's a very thought-provoking script at the end of the day.
Yeah, it has its outrageous moments and its humorous moments, but it definitely is a script with something to say and has done its research and knows its shit on the history. It wouldn't have the people bringing the knives out for it like they have with the Ridley Scott historical epics.
Mm-hmm. I think that's mainly due to Ridley Scott just getting lazy as time goes on.
And Ridley Scott having to give interviews about it every time it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Which it's getting to the point where his interviews are a little bit more entertaining than some of his movies.
Yeah.
I liked Gladiator 2, but it wasn't great.
Yeah. I've not seen it.
It's fine. It's a decent movie. It's hurt by the fact that's a Gladiator sequel, really.
I guess then, does this leave you open for reviewing Nick Cave's Gladiator 2? I
did it in December.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
But no, apparently this was getting ready to go. And what I think is interesting about this is that it basically is kind of, it's both, the way it works is like an Arnold movie is interesting because it's both giving him an opportunity to kind of stretch a little as an actor while also completely playing into all of his strengths and kind of tropes. You get some one-liners in there. You get the scenes of him being ridiculously strong and some of the humor, but it's also a chance for him to do some more dramatic stuff. Because most of the stuff he wanted to do in that arena never really happened. Because you had Conan early on, and then he had he wanted to do this, he wanted to do With Wings of Eagles. There was King Conan, but all that stuff never really worked. And by the time he did the dramatic role, it was Maggie, and it was too late, and nobody cared.
Yep. After his governorship, after his controversies, I mean, I like Arnold, despite my disagreements with him, I guess I should say. I mean, talking as if I've even met the guy, I haven't.
No, I haven't either.
Yeah. Obviously, I like him as an actor, and even as a person, I think he has his strong points. But I do think running for governor took away from giving another decade of Arnold movies, unfortunately.
Yeah, we could have gotten Doc Savage from him. We could have gotten any number of things.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we kind of left with Terminator 3 and Around the World in 80 Days, and then we didn't get anything for like a decade, and then we get stuff again, and God bless the man for trying.
I liked The Last Stand.
Yeah, I mean, look, I haven't seen it, but it's obvious that his career is never gonna return to a regular career in acting, if that makes sense.
Yes, well, the big mistake he made was placing all his chips on Terminator Genesis. Yeah, but that is that is a shame. And so basically, this was getting ready to go, but Carolco was having their issues with money, and they were because I think part of it was that they gave James Cameron a blank check for Terminator 2. So even though it made a ton of money, they actually were kind of in the red on that one.
They had some theaters in Europe, if I'm not mistaken, that were failing financially.
Yeah, but they had a bunch of stuff going on, and they were concerned about how high the budget was getting. Let me pull up, see if I can find the page.
You should also mention that Arnold had a pay-to-play contract for this film.
That happens. But there's the story Arnold tells. I can't find the exact number here, but it's. But they had, Schwarzenegger tells the story about how they were having a meeting with the Carolco people, and they asked him, can you promise you will make the movie and not go over this budget?
It was about a guarantee, and Verhoeven said, I can't guarantee you anything.
And Arnold was kicking him under the table, going, don't fucking say that.
Yeah.
And so they went, nah, we're going to make Cutthroat Island, and that ended up being a huge bomb.
Yeah.
And that was, ill-conceived on their part, but that's hindsight for you.
Yeah. And I hate to say, probably even if Crusade had been a success, and even if Cutthroat Island had been a success, I feel like there were. It just seems like there were one too many missteps in their pursuit of success that it would eventually, sooner rather than it would have sooner or later, it would have ended the company. I hate to say.
Yeah, and so Arnold ended up taking the rights to the project himself and shopping it around. And I'm assuming this really wasn't helped by the fact that his star kind of started to fall right after the script was written, because Last Action Hero was a major flop. True Lies was a big hit, but then Eraser didn't do much. You had Batman and Robin, of course. His movies after that just weren't doing that well. And by the time he got something set up at 20th Century Fox, he was basically waiting for Verhoeven. He wanted to get Verhoeven involved again. He was waiting for him to finish up Hollow Man, and then 9/11 happened.
Yep, and you can now see why the script did not get made.
9/11 happened, and that just killed the momentum. And I have no doubt that Kingdom of Heaven bombing also contributed.
I mean, it was probably just another nail in a coffin, but I don't think it was probably that big of a nail. If I had to be honest. And also, I mean, Verhoeven doesn't have the same career that he had in the late 80s to early 90s.
Yeah, because Showgirls happened.
Also Carolco,
yeah, and I don't think did Starship Troopers make money?
Let me look that up.
I'm not sure. I have the fucking internet here. Why am I not looking it up?
Okay, so it has an estimated budget of 100 million to 110, and then at the box office it made just 121 million. So I guess all said and done, probably not.
No, that's not a profit at all.
Yeah.
That's not even breaking even. And I think Hollow Man did okay, but that's
I mean, it got enough to make a direct-to-video sequel.
Yeah, and that was
yeah.
the movie where Verhoeven is like, "Why am I making this crap?" And he went back to Europe.
So
okay, let me look at the
bittersweet note to end on.
Hollow Man did really good.
Surprisingly, yeah.
It made 90. It was the budget was 95 million. The box office was 190.2 million.
Okay,
that's a profit.
Yeah, can't argue with that, I guess. This is kind of a sad, bittersweet ending, I guess, for us. I mean, the bittersweetness comes from the fact that we do have this script that we can readily read at any time.
Yeah, true. Ooh, Flesh and Blood did not make money.
Well, that was early in his career and didn't stop him.
Yeah, $6.5 million budget, and it made $100,000 in the United States. That's bad even by Black Hat standards.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it is a shame it didn't happen because it could have been like, it would have been a good movie for both of them to do. It would have been a real kind of next step for them to take, I think, and it would have had an interesting effect on their career trajectories.
I think it would have challenged a good deal of perception about not only just them, but in terms of storytelling or what you can do with an action movie.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe it would have, and to think if it would have come out, would it have been competing against like Braveheart?
Well, you have to consider which iteration are we talking about? Are we talking about the Carolco iteration, or if 9/11 doesn't occur at 20th Century Fox?
The Carolco one.
Yeah, because if it had come out in like the 20th Century Fox era of when Schwarzenegger getting made, that would have been competing against what, Star Wars and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, so that would have been a very different landscape.
Yeah, and post-Titanic success as well.
Titanic, yeah, yikes. So it would have been competing against Pearl Harbor.
I mean, this is better than Pearl Harbor.
Oh, no shit. Okay, I'm just seeing this on the Flesh and Blood page. It won a Golden Calf for Best Feature Film. That is very funny, considering it's a Verhoeven movie. And the religious themes we've been talking about this whole time. But yeah, that was Crusade. Interesting read. Definitely you should read it for yourself, because there's no way two jackasses talking about it on the internet is going to do any justice to it.
Mm-hmm.
But
now, who do you see? I was going to say one more crew member possibility. I would assume that Jan de Bont at this point is doing his stuff. The other cinematographer that Verhoeven works with at this time is Joost Vacano.
And what is he known for?
Total Recall,
okay.
RoboCop, RoboCop, and then Showgirls and Starship Troopers and Hollow Man. So I think it's safe to say that this would have been the cinematographer of choice at this point.
Yeah,
for
maybe,
Verhoeven.
Yeah.
Not to mention he also did Das Boat with Wolfgang Peterson.
Oh, okay. I still need to see that.
Yeah, so I love Jan de Bont's cinematography. I think at that point, Jan de Bont would have been doing his own thing. And I think at this point, Jost would have been Verhoeven's first choice for cinematographer.
Yeah. And he also did Neverending Story.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I guess that kind of is good to wrap things up.
Yeah, no, this was fun. I don't do this often, but every time we do, I always have anxiety, but then, I always have fun with it by the end.
You have no idea how many times I stop and start over when I'm recording a solo episode.
I can imagine. I've been there.
Until I get the rhythm going, and then I'm like, okay, this is actually sounding good. Wow, mm-hmm. He has not shot a movie since Hollow Man. Did he die? No, he's still alive. He's 90.
I love that we're distracting ourselves with Jost Vacano's filmography.
Wikipedia page. Man, he looked at he looked at Hollow Man and went, "I'm done."
Yep.
But that was Crusade. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and until next time, bye.
Bye.